So with that, up next, we have our plenary panel on achieving efficiency, agility, and resiliency, moderated by our own Dr. Nick Vyas. Please welcome them all up here.
You're supposed to be in
just kidding.
certain order here?
I don't think so.
I just grabbed it. You want to start? Yeah.
All the way?
That's not bad. Just sit down. Just
we good?
grab a chair. Yeah.
All right.
There is no. Okay, we're waiting for Jason Walker to join us. He's the head of the Maersk operations for North America, and supply chain delays have actually sort of got him into the delay here. All right, Jason, thank you. All right, guys, I know this is the last panel, and many of you are waiting for a late afternoon adult beverage or trying to do something social, and I'm not going to hold you up, but this is a very important topic that I want to really talk about it today with our esteemed panelists here. As I mentioned in the beginning of our conference, that we have adopted a new mission statement. The theme of this conference, our 10th annual Global Supply Chain, was built around agility, resiliency, sustainability, a multidimensional intelligent supply chain networks of the future. So today we're going to get into this about, is this real? Is this a hype? And how do we actually go about it? So I'm going to start with Jason. You, quick introduction about your role, what you do, and then we go make a quick introduction and we'll jump right into it. So
okay.
Please.
So Jason Walker, I'm the head of operations in North America for the performance team of Maersk Company. I'm basically responsible for all the transportation and distribution activity in the US and Canada. I was part of performance team for 10 years. Performance team was acquired by Maersk in 2020. Many may know that Maersk changed its strategy in 2016. It wasn't, its mission wasn't to become the greatest and biggest ocean container company in the world. It was to become a solutions provider and a fully integrated supply chain provider from end to end. But it needed to put together the tools to make that happen around the world. So if you watch the news and supply chain, you see continue acquisition across the globe for us to bring together the tools necessary to really be that fully integrated solution for our customers in the years ahead. And it is the mission for us to be a solutions and a platform organization. Although ocean is a big part of what we do, our logistics business is growing over 30% a year organically, and we are continually opening up new products and offerings so that our clients can use us throughout the network in a more end-to-end type of relationship. So my job is to take care of those commitments here in North America, have a fantastic team here that, we know that execution is the reason why we can continue to grow our business. We are in the business of trust. We pick providers because we trust them. In one of the panels, somebody said, as a supply chain leader, you have to place your bets. My goal and our goal is to be that organization that'd be willing to place your bets in.
Very good. You forgot the most important qualification of yours, which is you are Trojan Global Supply Chain Management
Trojan
family.
and an alumni from this
That's right.
deal. In cohort number 2. So I've been coming to this conference now for about 10 years.
Yep.
So.
Cohort 2. Thank you, Jason. Jeff?
I'm Jeff McDonald. I'm the Executive Vice President of NNR Global Logistics USA. I guess something different than what I've already talked about earlier and yesterday about myself is that I'm kind of one of those rare birds that have been with this company since undergraduate. And despite my young looks, it's been a few years. It's been a nice career with NNR. I've been over 20 years with these guys. And, I think that just talks about the ethos and the the long-term relationship that we like to build with our suppliers, with our customers, but also with our employees. And that, I think, is why we're so resilient and agile, because we have great people that stick around for a long time. So, thank you.
Raziel?
Raziel Bravo, and I am the Senior Vice President of Strategic Management for GEODIS Americas. And at the same time, I'm also an academic researcher trying to complete my doctorate from another state's university. Sorry, it's too far for me to go here. But then again, being in the industry for quite some time, just like what Chef said, it's been fascinating to see how diversification in this supply chain industry, it actually matters right now. Case in point, I check all the boxes so the students out there would have more opportunities, just like I did and the rest of the women in these organizations. Thank you.
Abe?
Thanks, Nick. My name's Abe Eshkenazi, currently the CEO for ASCM, the Association of Supply Chain Management. We represent approximately 45,000 supply chain professionals across the globe. We have a network of over 200 partners in 40 countries that we work with to disseminate our content. I think most of you probably understand our two certifications, CPIM and CSCP, are industry standards for individuals that enter into supply chain either as functional experts or as leads for organizations. Our previous mergers with Supply Chain Council and ASTNL allowed us to expand our footprint to end-to-end supply chain as opposed to the planning that we've been historically known for within the inventory in the organization. Our focus as an organization is really threefold. We grew up developing supply chain professionals, the individuals, and we thought that was the end of our journey. As long as we certified them and ensured that they were competent, that was the end of our journey. And then we realized that if they didn't contribute to organizational success, we haven't done our job. If we just trained them and they didn't perform and they didn't realize the contribution they were making to their organization, we still had a ways to go. Then when we thought that organizational performance was the end of our journey, that as long as we can ensure that organizations are successful and sustainable, that was the end of our journey. And then we realized that we needed to focus on the consumer. The individual that we focus all our supply chain efforts on is ultimately the patient or the customer or the consumer at the end of the road. And so our focus now is on the individual, preparing competent, capable individuals, organizational transformation to respond to some of the challenges, a number of challenges that we're all facing, and then finally, ensuring that we are a sustainable supply chain. We truly believe that supply chain can change the world, and we hope to be a part of that.
I think according to Gene's discussion, Gene Soroka's discussion, Abe is the rail in this scenario, the rail yards, the bottleneck, so to speak, with the water being passed down. Sorry, Abe.
I was about to say, please
Come
don't
on,
think that this is the
let it
port
flow,
being
rail.
the
Let it flow.
blockage.
Let it flow. Thank you. We're good. You got one?
I was about to.
Hold on. We're one
They flew
short
it
of
in.
the
They
bottom.
flew it in.
Now you go.
There we go.
And this was a practical demonstration of what not to do in supply chain.
Right. This was the 2020 version of the port being the blockage.
That's right.
Here.
All right, Samantha, please.
Yeah. So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Samantha Galltin. I'm the Managing Director of Commercial Operations for the Port of Long Beach. I've got responsibilities for the business development team, which I have a couple of my colleagues here today. I've got tenant services and operations and also security. I don't like to talk about them. I don't want to talk about them. They are scary, so we'll stay on the other side of those two things. But really happy to be here, and I also am an alumni of this program, cohort 7? 7. I was cohort 7. That was too long ago.
So, all right, so what we really wanted to talk about is achieving efficiency, agility, and resiliency. But I know you guys are the expert at efficiency. Over the last 3 decades, we have done an amazing job in supply chain driving efficiency. I really want to focus on agility and sort of a resiliency more so as an organization. Jason, I'm going to start with you. Maersk being the largest ship company, you guys are becoming vertically integrated.
Sure.
It's a huge journey of running the business in the big box, which is your background, having a customer facing for the last mile delivery, in many cases on the replenishment. How do you think the vertical integration fits in when we talk about the agility and resiliency, about Maersk model?
So one of the unique things about my job in managing, basically a 3PL, a distribution network here in the United States, is I have many clients and I get to see how they all solve this exact problem, right? And so if I was to go back and say, in my opinion, which ones rode through the COVID challenges the best, they were the ones that had the fewest amount of partners, right? And they partnered with those partners, right? They were meaningful to those partners. They didn't try to chase the dollars every place. They built many meaningful relationships, right, with a few very high quality providers, and those ones weathered the storm much better than those that were constantly chasing every year new pricing, every year new warehousing, and those kind of things. And so from what I've witnessed, if you were to take a vertical like apparel or footwear or electronics, in my role, those supply chain leaders that have rode the storm the best have been the ones that have again, picked a vertically integrated partner that maybe has 3 or 4 of the nodes of the supply chain and bolted those together, and then have a relationship at the very senior levels in those organizations to be able to drive results.
Very good. So Jeff, that actually gets to challenge the 3PL and 4PL model being non-vessel operators. As an NVOCC, do you see when the liners get into this vertical integration, is that a challenge for you guys to compete and provide a better value? And how does the agility and resiliency fits into the model of 3PL and 4PL?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, you look at Maersk, MSC, even Amazon, right? They're pushing into new areas through getting vertically integrated, buying more and more assets in different parts of the supply chain. For us, we're taking the opposite approach. We're definitely figuring out how to decentralize, how to minimize bureaucracy, how to strengthen and empower our branches and our local facilities in order for them to be as agile as possible, as close to the customer as possible. We're extremely lean, we're extremely flat in our organization. And, so again, we see it as definitely there's a risk there and there's some additional competition. But for us, we're leaning into the fact that we want to be extremely agile. We want to have more flexibility, not less. I don't want to have to worry about filling my assets, when things slow down, rather than providing the best solution for my client at that time and plugging and playing. Obviously, there's space for both of those, we believe, in the supply chain.
So let's carry on. Raziel, I've done substantial writings on the decouplings of supply chain, diversifying the risk profile from not having all your manufacturing sourced from the one location, supplier diversity, and all of those things. From your strategic framework and analysis that you do, is that the reality? Do you think it's likely to happen, and how fast, and if not, why not?
Well, what we're seeing right now in the market, and basically because not just in academic research and at the same time in practice right now, is that yes, supplier diversification is not just how it was in the past, wherein you're going to be moving from one supplier, one sourcing to, let's say, Asia, now in Latin America. That's a growing market right now. But then they're also looking at places in Europe, Northern Europe or Eastern Europe, places that it does not matter, the cost is not really the primary driver for them to diversify. It's really the availability of the product because of what we have seen because of COVID. It's really the advancement in trying to get the product from one place to another, the sourcing. So what we have talked about is how supply chains could be one or non-linear. It could be from one to another before, but now it's not really just from one place to another, but then from one place to be brought to another place for it to be consolidated, or to be remanufactured or assembled, all the way to be sent out to another place. So it's not really what we're seeing in the past, what we have seen in the past, wherein it's just primarily from sourcing all the way to production, manufacturing, all the way to retail and distribution. What's going on right now is that there would be subsets of assembly manufacturing and then light manufacturing before it actually gets distributed. Like what's happening before in the automotive sector in Mexico, it's now being consumed by the retail sector as well, and other industries would certainly follow suit.
So Abe, we actually did a podcast yesterday, Supply Chain Demystified, and we talked about 30 years in our working life we saw, and we were a culprit in many cases to take US manufacturing base primarily and driving it into Asia. I remember taking entire sourcing office of 600 people and moving it to Hong Kong and China, right? And I was tasked to do that. We've seen that evolution sort of being challenged under the COVID. Give me your perspective. How real this agility and resilience is going to play?
I think it's probably at the top of every CEO, COO, CFO's list right now, priorities. Challenges that among the points that are made here is that the consumer, and that's one of the areas that we really haven't spent a lot of time on, is who drives supply chains, and that's the consumer. And we've been racing to the bottom for almost 20 to 30 years on just in time, on efficiencies, on cost reduction, and we had an extremely efficient system prior to the pandemic. But what we didn't really pay attention to was a lot of the systemic issues that were within the supply chain. Labor shortages, committed contracts with single source suppliers. And for a lot of the larger organizations, it made sense. They wielded the power, they wielded the purchasing. A lot of the small and medium-sized organizations didn't have that opportunity or that capability. And the challenges that we saw were not in tier 1 suppliers, it was in tier 2, tier 3, where most of the organizations didn't have visibility, where most of the challenges occurred. Committed contracts to the larger suppliers were always they're gonna maintain, and they're not gonna turn their back on it. It's that lack of visibility and information and data in that tier 2 and tier 3 that really hamstrung us. But yet, when you have committed contracts, when you have just-in-time as your primary objective, then you're not looking for additional sources, you're not looking for redundancy, and you're not looking for resiliency issues. And unfortunately, we were preparing for the last disruption as opposed to the next disruption. And I saw the chart that I think Gene had on the black swan. It's a gaggle of swans. It's not a black swan. We've got multiple issues that are challenging us. And I think it exposed a lot of the challenges that we had within supply chain. Specifically, what do we do with demand surges, demand shifts, and supply problems when they occur? And we were not prepared as an industry.
I think that's a great point, and that brings us to Samantha, you. You control 40% of the freight coming into between you and your neighbor, Port of Los Angeles. How does the agility and resiliency factor in for you guys?
Yeah, so it's a little bit harder for us as landlord ports because, I think before the pandemic, we took a very hands-off approach. It's the terminals, it's the steamship lines, it's someone else. We just own the land, don't talk to us. But what we found in these last 2 years is that we had to take a more active role. We had to understand what was going on, and we had to be more than just a landlord port. So we got active. So we activated new land. So we saw that the terminals were being congested just as I was holding all of the water bottles, right? They were holding all I think I'm just gonna come back to that every time. It's such a great visual. They were holding on to all of this freight and didn't have a place to go. So we activated land so we could have surge capacity. And that was really important for our terminals to be able to just throw stuff out, get stuff out of their gates so that they could offload more from the vessels so they could take more back and continue the cycle. So that was one thing. Another thing is data visibility, right? And I think that's been talked about for the last 2 days, is just getting the information to our stakeholders, to our customers, to be able to do things a little bit better. So I think with the resiliency of, or the lack thereof, of the supply chain, we really took a hold of it and said, hey, we've got a part in this, and we've got to help. Those are 2 ways that we did this year.
So let's start to talk about this whole issue, the burning platform issues that we dealt with, which certainly COVID magnified it. I thought the structural deficiencies of our supply chains has been there for 15 years. We all talked about it. Many corporate social responsibility, the words have always been embedded. We just never had the aptitude nor desire or will to actually really start to talk about these things. Think about Port of Long Beach. You said that you are now trying to be much more active landlord port. Last month, the port productivity report showed up, right? All you guys are probably in sustainability side leading port in North America, but efficiency has been challenged about how U.S. ports lag globally. You know, I go to Singapore twice a year. I just visited 3 times in 30 days and visited the port, and I was just blown away. The advancement of how they view the critical assets versus our approach as a country. And I don't want you to speak this in terms of just Long Beach, but as a country, if U.S. were to really become agile and resilient, what do we need to do?
So the first thing I want to point out, and I tend to have to put this on a brokered record, we still moved more freight than we ever have before, consecutively for 2 years, right? We still are moving an insane amount of freight. Yes, we could do it better. Yes, there are so many pain points. Yes, there are so many complaints. But we really need to keep that in the forefront as a base, is that we still have moved more freight than we ever have before. Now, how can we do it better? We have to be agile, we have to have that surge capacity, but we also have to understand the basis of why we're in where we're at. When we think about supply chain, everything is connected, right? So all of my congestion is because of something else, because of something else, because of, I keep going. So right now, as Gene talked about the rail freight, well, why isn't the rail moving more boxes? I could put more steel in the ground. I can put more infrastructure in the ground. But if we don't talk about velocity, we will never get to where we need to be. So I think that is what we need to talk about, is how things move from one point to the other faster. If we got each box to move just an hour faster, times however million TEUs that we do, how much faster would this whole supply chain go? So that's the first thing I would do, is just look specifically at velocity. Why aren't things moving as fast as they are? The chassis, the boxes, the railroads, or the rails, truck power, all of that. So that's the first thing. And then 2 is just, it's always gonna be visibility. I don't know what I don't know until I don't see, right? So as the Port of Long Beach, you heard Dr. Noel Hasagabe yesterday talk about the information supply chain highway. That's what we're trying to do. Liberate the data so that each person can ingest it the way that they need to, so they can optimize and make better their own supply chains, make better decisions, plan, get everything together so that you can make that box turn just a little bit faster. Shall I go on?
I think that was enough to actually bring the better perspective on are we ready with the infrastructure. Thank you. Let's see, I want to see any panelists, your comment about as a country, you know, we talk about all this agility and resiliency. Do we have infrastructure to support this?
Well, this is where, yeah, Nick, if you don't mind, I think what is really lacking from my point of view is alignment between industry and government. I mean, you look at some of these laws that are passed, like we talked about HB 5 or these regulations, the CARB Act. These are things that aren't in sync with the way the industry needs to move. So we need more of a long-term vision. We need a seat at the table to sit down and talk. We need to think what's going to win 5 years, 10 years, 20 years from now, rather than what's going to win me the next vote, or how can I throw money at a certain group of constituents. Let's solve big systemic issues that we have, and let's work in collaboration. So, I think until that happens, we're really going to struggle, and it's always going to be piecemeal and ad hoc. So until there's kind of a clear vision, a line of sight, a long-term plan that's aligned with industry, with consumers, with workers, truck drivers, whatever that is, and the government and the states and federal, we're going to have a challenge. So I think that's key to get a seat at the table.
So let's expand on that. You had a chance to live in Shanghai and Singapore.
Yeah.
What can we learn? What lessons do you think that we as a country, we as a society can adopt and embrace?
Well, I think Singapore and Shanghai, as you said, I've lived in both of those locations. They're similar in ways and different in ways. How I would say they're similar is that the government has a clear vision of what they want to achieve in both areas. So Singapore is very strong, and again, they have a long-term vision about some of the key areas that they want to emphasize, whether that's digitization, efficiency, promoting certain long-term views of industry. They know they're not going to be a manufacturing powerhouse. So 5 years ago, 10 years ago, they started looking at how can we promote not this, not what we're at now with technology, but where are we going to be 10 years from now? And let's start thinking and investing in studying for that. Like as an example, we're throwing a lot of money at solar in this last bill. Is solar where we should be focusing, or should we be saying, what's hydrogen? You know, the government, how can we invest in what's next? China already makes heaps of very inexpensive solar panels. So again, so I think it's really just the government having a long-term vision and saying, how can we make a better country? How can we align with our constituents? And how can we drive that through? So yeah, I mean, it's a challenge because everybody's looking for an election, right? Which is a little different than in Shanghai. They're looking for that next election cycle. But unless we have a common goal, something in writing, a target, this is what we want to achieve 10 years from now, yeah, it's going to be a struggle. And that's what Singapore does, obviously. They do it very well, very integrated throughout the supply chain, through industry as well.
What do we see today? We see clients just having a port diversification plan right now, right? And so where are they going, right? Places like Savannah, Houston, Mobile, other places, right? Those places are behind in infrastructure as well. They can only do so much and lift so much, right? So it's not just about this area. It's about every major port connection, and then what's going on with rail, trucking capacity, etc. Right? You look at Savannah today, I believe it's backed up 45 ships. It's 3.5 weeks out. Houston's backed up. All that's happened is things have shifted around to places that really don't have the infrastructure. And in some cases, they don't have the population to really support the infrastructure that's going in, and that's going to be a real challenge in the years to come in some of those secondary port markets.
So Abe, you have over 40,000 members, run one of the large supply chain association. Why not have these narratives on the mainstream media? I mean, I often talk about crippling issues of decouplings of supply chain, almost handicapping ourselves using democracy as a sort of a crutch that we can't seem to make a common sense legislation and pass it through both houses, and we politicize even infrastructure bills. Do you think we owe more sort of a pounding on the table kind of a conversation? How do we move this needle forward?
I want to amplify a point that Jeff made, and that's the collaboration, not only within industries on information sharing and some of the challenges that we have within certain industrial supply chains, but what is the role of government relative to demand surges, demand shifts, and criticality of products, whether PPEs, ventilators, you name it. And I think this is where we fall down as a capitalist society, is that we're putting it on the back of private enterprises to have redundant facilities, to have staff just waiting to be actuated, inventories that sit idle just in case. That is not a formula that you can take to a CFO and say, here's what we need to do to be resilient and agile, is to have all these redundant facilities, excess inventory, and staff just waiting. But there's a responsibility collectively that we all have to maintain, whether PPE, ventilators, and I think this is where we fell down as an industry, is that it wasn't a responsibility of anybody. It was nobody's responsibility. I think we need a public, private, academic, and an association collaboration to understand how a joint effort can be addressing some of the challenges. Semiconductors is a good example of what the government is doing relative to investing and incentivizing organizations to rebuild that infrastructure. And again, this is a long-term project. This is not a tomorrow project, going back to Jeff's point. This is a strategic initiative for the government as well as private industry. I think we need more of those types of investment, incentivized for the private industry, but the academic and the associations can play a significant part in data aggregation and in data dissemination, because we need to have everybody looking at the same information that you are looking at. Unfortunately, we're not seeing it, and I think the government in their infinite wisdom asking providers or public companies to share their data to the government, just send me your information and we'll make sure that it's shared with everybody. I think we see the challenge in organizations sharing data.
To Abe's point, just off the press, about 2 hours ago, House actually passed the $468 billion bill, of which $58 billion will be allocated to semiconductor chip manufacturers. So that bill actually just passed the House, and now it will be signed by President Biden and will become the law. So we finally have some meaningful legislation out of both chambers and into the law. So
One
it's
of the
a
things
great
we
news.
haven't talked about, though, is what is that going to do to our training partners? When we pull out of those areas that we've been using for decades, and now we pull out because it's in our national interest and our national security, what does that do to the trade imbalances as well as the trade treaties that are in the, currently being used right now?
Yeah, so I think, if I may, just, and Jeff, if you want to chime right in it, I think when we talk about the decoupling, so even this is incentives, it's not to extract 100% of the capacity, right, out of those countries. So you think about Samsung, Foxconn, or Intel building this large infrastructure, will take advantage of this $60 billion capital infusion incentives. The idea is to build a North American supply chain cluster at home. Right. So if you're using the chips, that they are designed for any communication to be used both in military, defense, or space application, those would have to be manufactured, those chips, in this country. So I think if I'm interpreting the books correctly, which I've actually gone into the depth to understand, I hope that the idea of decoupling is not to bring everything home and build the walls so that we become the self-sustained enterprise. That is absolutely counterproductive, I think, because we have a lot more to sell to the two of the large population in Asia, India and China. We have a rest of the world. Our population's growth and the consumption growth is relatively small. So I, at least in my view, Jeff or Raziel, you guys have a different perspective. Jeff, you were saying something.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think it needs to be maybe a decoupling rather than deglobalization. I'm definitely a free trader. I believe in markets. I believe in the wisdom of the markets, the hand, the intelligent hand of the market. And I also believe that having an integrated world is a safer world as well in a lot of ways. So, I guess the fear again I have is more around the regulation side that, there's political points always to be scored by subsidizing more and more industries, and that the government actually pulls us away from things that actually make us more resilient and safer as a globe, as well as a country. So, we got to make sure that we keep it to certain elements. Maybe it's national security with the semiconductors, but that's where I have questions around kind of the solar panels and some of these other things. Is that really a relevant spot for us to spend our taxpayer dollars?
Right, and to your point earlier, and we've heard it over and over during this conference, there's labor shortage, there's manpower skill set requirements that would have to be elevated in this country. What have we been doing so far? We have been outsourcing a lot of the work that has to be done here. And yet, if we move everything within, let's say, our four walls of our country, then how would that now impact the rest of the supply chain? Again, it's going to be another domino effect as what we have encountered so far.
We also outsource a lot of our sustainability as well. I mean, to be honest with you, I mean, solar panels is a pretty dirty business, and mining lithium and nickel and all these other things as well when it comes to EVs is also a challenge. And again, I'm not here to just to beat on things, like I'm not trying to be negative, but we just have to be realistic and look at the supply chain holistically and understand how these are all interconnected, and there's trade-offs and consequences to everything that we do.
So, Raziel, you brought up a very good point, the shortages in human capital. Jason, you run pretty large operations in a pretty large organization. What keeps you up about these human capital issues? Department of Labor 2030 predicts 30% shortage of supply chain skills workforce. How do you bridge this gap?
I mean, certainly the toughest part of the last 2 years seems to be mellowing out. Like coming into the peak season this year, getting the labor needed to support the network is not nearly as challenging as it was the last 2 peak seasons. So we're already seeing this shift. Wages are up, but finding the right individuals is not as difficult as it has been. This is a unique year, right? In that we're not as concerned about, that. For us, we know that our growth will be limited if we don't find the right leaders, right, to bring this thing alive, to truly become this integrator, right? facilities and transportation networks and terminals and all of those things. It takes unique leaders that are driven by this industry to drive those locations. I will tell you the difference in any of nodes in my network is the leader that drives those deals. And that's not going away anytime soon in supply chain, right? So finding and retaining that talent to bring those teams together is very critical in our deal. It's crucial. And we're really focused on the development of individuals and in the long-term approach and career approach for individuals at Maersk, which is quite different with others in our industry. You know, we're looking long on the right people. Right.
This is probably where I've got a bone to pick with organizations right now. Any organization can get any amount of money for technology right now. Yeah. Get it for professional development, get it for workforce training, and this is where we see a difference in investment, and it always seems to correlate with the performance of the organization. The better the performance, the more that we invest in our workforce. The less the performance, we're going to cut back on memberships, we're going to cut back on professional training. This is a long-term investment. If I ask any organization, what's your number one asset? What would you tell me?
People.
People. If you do asset rationalization, what do you invest in? Your worst performing asset or your best performing asset when the situation arises? And we're not seeing a commensurate investment in talent at the same level as we are in technology right now. A study that was done on organizations hiring new graduates. So you may want to pay attention here where you're overweighted and where you're underweighted relative to what organizations are looking for. Where are you overweighted? In technology. You have more technology than we're able to maximize its use. Where are we underweighted? Real world experience and critical thinking. If you put those two together, it's a dangerous combination to have underweighted in critical thinking and overweighted in technology without people understanding what the data input is and what the data output is. And I think this is where we need to spend a little bit more time on developing the workforce of tomorrow to understand the data needs and how to be a really resource for an organization using data.
So Abe, I gotta tell you, as a proud papa, the two of these panelists here, they're byproduct of this program, so I hope we're doing something right.
They're Big
in terms
Ten
of
graduates.
creating the future leaders of this organization.
So coming from an old Big Ten school, welcome to the Big Ten.
Hey, we're looking forward to it. I think we're looking forward to it. Now, real competition will start now.
Yeah, but last time Northwestern played SC, it was not good.
But Dave, to that point, I think that training is hard. It's a lot harder.
Yeah.
It's a lot harder. And it's also much faster to show an ROI on automation and technology. I mean, you can. It's easy to do the computation, whereas workforce development is a long-term commitment, and that ROI comes much later down the cycle, and it's also very abstract in how to measure it. So I agree with you 100%, though. It's really the people that are critical and where the investment needs to be made.
Companies tell
but that's
us two
why
things.
I'm glad Nick is happy. That's why he's doing the hard work of training these good folks.
Companies say there's two reasons they don't train. Number one, I don't have the time. And the other is that, I'm going to lose them if I train them. And we tell them, you're right, you may lose them, but I guarantee you're going to keep them if you don't train them. Which would you rather have?
Right, yeah, good point, good point.
So Sam, as a port, I mean, do you guys have labor issues at all?
Sorry. Yes. I mean, aside from the labor negotiations, which I will not talk about, but it's just training the right resources for the right technologies, right? And so that's why we're standing up, and we have the project with the Port of LA to have our resource training center so that we can train all of our folks on the waterfronts on either the latest technologies or just to run a crane. And right now we're doing that in active live areas, right? So it's very limited the way that we can actually train our workforce right now. When we take that off and actually make a workforce community, we can do it safely and without having to mess up what's going on at that day. But not only that, though, we also have a lot of outreach programs, right? We're going to outreach into high schools, to colleges, and I don't know about you, but when I was going to college, I had no idea what supply chain was, what supply chain existed. I entered the railroad right after college. I had no idea freight railroads existed at all. I literally thought I was applying to Amtrak, and it was BNSF. Not a good plan. But I mean, there's so many opportunities within supply chain, and sometimes I think it gets honed down into you have to be a trucker or like a train master to be in supply chain. That's not true. You can be a doctor in supply chain. You can be a data analyst. You can be procurement. So many different things that we have to go out there and educate everybody about this marketplace, that there's so many opportunities. And yes, I'm very proud to be a Trojan, but I'm sorry, Villanova's gonna beat y'all at some point, because that's my undergrad. But like even there, when I go back to them and say, hey, I work in supply chain, they're still like, what? What do you do? So there's a lot of education that still needs to be had about what supply chain is, what the opportunities are, and how we get the young people to be where they need to be so that when they get to us, they're ready to go.
But Nick, if there's anything that COVID brought to the table is that there's more awareness of what supply chain is outside of the industry. The same experience that Samantha had. I got into this industry by accident as well, because of course I was in marketing and of course glamorous job in advertising. And then I wanted to work closer to the airport, so at least it's not too far and I don't have to go into traffic. So that's how my first experience in the industry is. There were no, except if you're gonna go to Europe or a short courses in supply chain or what they call it logistics management courses, they never had those. Now a lot of schools everywhere in the country are offering supply chain courses, which is actually more beneficial for practitioners like all of us. So it was a benefit. If there was a light at the end of the tunnel, is that people are more aware now of what supply chain is and what supply chain disruptions are, instead of explaining to them where their suits are coming from or where the shirts and their backs are coming from. Instead of explaining it that way, it explained itself.
Very well said. So, I want to leave a couple of minutes for the Q&A, but we're going to go around, Jason, from you. We updated our mission statement, making resiliency, agility, and sustainability as a sort of a triple bottom line mindset. You tell me, from your vantage point, running an organization now, the do's and don'ts for university and program like ours, and you've been through one, what can we do to foster that vision? What are things we could do to give you the human capital that you're looking for, not today, but 2 years from now and 10 years from now?
To me, I think the two things that are critical is that people learn what it means to solve complex problems in a team, right? With various talents and inputs, right? Critical thinking is a big piece of it. Look, I think, soft skills, just general leadership, I think is oftentimes pushed to the side on, I remember when I was here, there was a class, leading engineers or something like that. Like you have to have a special thing to lead engineers, and you kind of do, right? But, it's so important that there is this leadership experience that comes. When individuals from the program come and interview with me, the first thing I look at is, what have they done and how large of groups have they been successfully managing? It says a lot, right? The degree is great, but if you've not led groups of people through complex problems, it's hard for me to bring you into the fold, especially in operations, right? And take on a big project. So anyway, that's my take. And if you can, drive curriculum and be in those areas, right?
Well said.
Yeah, I second that. I think those are great, and I would say the same thing. The other thing I would say, Nick, is I think it takes experience, I think, but I hope that we can start training people on how decisions, there's no right or wrong, there's always trade-offs, and there's also unintended consequences to everything we do, and thinking holistically and saying, well, if we do A, we're going to get the result of B. However, down the track, what could be the unintended consequence that we get, and how can we think of things holistically? I think that, they mentioned it a little bit earlier on one of the presentations. Again, kind of like, okay, if this is a regulation, as an example, and we're promoting that even within the organization, okay, so what are the positive outcomes that you're going to get? But also, let's think laterally and think like, what else can come about? What are some of those downstream consequences of these decisions so that we can think way more laterally? I think people just make a decision, oh, we should centralize, we should do this, it should be simple, and things aren't simple. So understanding the nuance and complexity would be what I would want to focus on with the team.
So I believe that the supply chain industry needs more research, especially coming from practitioners like us, right? Because it's different when you incorporate the academic perspective into actual practice. And at the same time, strategic thinking is always a good component to have, because sometimes a lot of us as practitioners, we tend to focus on what's the problem of the now, right? So we solve it now, but we have the data, let's get the data in, but then how do we really use the data to create a future perspective for the organization or for a supply chain concept that would be useful for the organization to either solve the problem or to create something that would be beneficial for the organization in general.
I want to pick up something Samantha pointed out and ask the audience a question. How many of you knew that supply chain was going to be your field of study when you entered school at a college? Take a look around, folks. This is the problem, in that we do not have individuals coming into academic institutions looking for supply chain as a career. So the benefits, I think, we can spend literally days talking about the benefits. The challenge is that we don't have a well-defined career path for individuals in supply chain. If I wanted to be a CFO, I knew exactly the roles and responsibilities and the experiences and the certifications I needed to become a CFO. If I asked every organization, what does it become to a CSC or a global supply chain officer, you'll find different career paths, which is extraordinary because there's a lot of opportunity in the market, but yet it's not well understood. And so the point before about consumers understanding supply chain, their understanding is click, either it arrived or it didn't arrive. Very little understanding the harmony, the synchronization, and all the activities globally that it takes to get a product to your doorstep. So I think we've got to do a much better job in explaining to individuals coming out of high schools about the opportunity in supply chain, and then working to expose and highlight some of the challenges as well as some of the benefits of supply chain. And this is the sustainability part. And I'm going to pound this nail a little bit here, but it's kind of hard to talk about sustainability, about rebuilding your house when you're putting out a fire in almost every room. But yet, this is a systemic issue that we have within supply chain. We have a lot of challenges within supply chain that aren't well understood by the consumer. And I think we need to spend a little bit more time in identifying those challenges and then working collectively to address them. It's going to come home. It's just a matter of time before we're addressing this as the number one issue. Right now, it's more rhetoric than action, but at a certain point, we'll get over the acute issues and start to tackle some of the systemic issues. And labor, DE&I, and sustainability are at the top of our challenges.
Sam?
It's always fun to go last because they take all the good stuff.
Well, you can.
Always.
I made it easy for you because I did second to everything they said.
So I would say first to the students, I think supply chain, mostly transportation, is an outdoor sport. Get outside. Go ride in a truck. Get on a train. Go sit with people so that you can really understand what those jobs are. I will say my time as a train master, which is a glorified logistics manager for trades, that is the only thing that helped me really rise to the top because I had a foundation and to understand how things move from point A to point B. That was how I built my career. So please get outside. Network, 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 and then network your way outside. The second piece is never accept we've just done this before and this is how we do it. We're never going to change. And I tell, like, my staff they probably said, they'll say that they heard it from me. Don't tell me that. There could be a reason why we do that, but you better explain to me why, and it better be really good for me to continue to go with status quo. Challenge it constantly, because that is the only way that we're going to change. That is the only way that we evolve, and that's the only way that I think that you start to make a difference.
Excellent. We will actually, let's give a very big round of applause to the panel first. I know I have a wrap, and I'm going to let the panel sit here for a few minutes, if you don't mind, while I do my closing speech and be part of the closings. So I know I told you I was going to let you guys ask a couple of questions, but the time is of an essence, and I want to give you guys a gift of time. This is the 10th annual Global Supply Chain Summit, and such an incredible milestone that we have achieved. Marv, if I may please have our staff join you over here. Wait. Hold on your applause. I want to make sure. I want to make sure that they're all here in person because, it's easy for me to have the vision and the mission statement and ideas and think outside the box. And it's easy for me to think and imagine things. But I'll tell you, the labor and human capital issues that you guys deal in the corporate world is no different in higher education institution. It's in fact even tougher because you don't come to make money into the education system. Underpinning reasons why you would come is that you have to have a purpose and passion, right? And I am probably the most blessed individual in this organization because I have absolutely phenomenal team. They do magic day in and day out. We don't rest. We're gonna regroup with the team, lesson learned, debrief, and set the tone for cohort 11 and annual Global Supply Chain Summit 11, which is a Friday next week. Think about it, 6 days of gap, and we are going to actually talk about it. My leadership team in my organizations, Katie, please raise your hand. Katie, Marvi, Jean, Gabriel, Ruth, and all my students. This student, they do an incredible magical stuff, and my staff always absolutely delivers what I call the 1212 degree of passion. Steaming every day. There is not a day that I don't see them powering this engine forward. So I want to thank you, all of you. And my faculties, that they are as passionate in the classroom to really translate all of these things we're doing. And I've shared the mission statement with them, and we have a faculty meeting in which I will translate what does the change means for us in the classroom. Also, running an institute is like running a corporation. You have to have an amazing board, leaders, supporters. Carl, Stephanie, being in my executive board, Jean is not here, Noel is not here, and many of you who serve on this board as a volunteer. And all of you pay to be on the board. So think about this. Not only they have a passion, but they're also contributing financially to do what we do the best, is to really build the future generation. So I want to thank you all, and thanks for being here. Last but not the least, the endowing is a big privilege in higher education. Many of the thought leaders that they spend decades, in many cases their entire lifetime, and never have a chance to be endowed. And being able to have Randy's support to create Randall R. Kendrick Global Supply Chain Management Institute and create the trust and provide for us to have the next decade and beyond of our ability to become the thought leaders and provide the supply chains of the future, not to just maintain, but to break the paradigm and reshape at the government level, the policymakers, industry partners, associations, and industry altogether. And I'm very blessed for Randy's support. I know he's not here, but Joaquin, you represent ZBAC. I want my personal gratitude to the ZBAC and Randy and Gretchen for their support. So thank you so very much. My students, a few years from now, you will be sitting here, right? Leading in organizations like many of our family members have done. Supply chain for all of us. To be honest with you, if you're not excited being in it, I promise to you, you will be excited because the next 10, 20, 30, 40 years It is going to be the different supply chain. It's driven by the innovations. Agility and resiliency is no longer going to be accepted as a buzzwords. It's going to be part of our DNA. And I hope all of you over the last 2 days have learned and took this content, and hopefully it was stimulating enough for you to actually go back out there and charge the course in terms of what the future holds for all of us. So all the gratitude for all of you being here, supporting this institute, supporting this program. Thank you very much. Enjoy your weekend. Thanks again, and I look forward to seeing all of you next time.